Join me for part 2 as we continue our interview with Sifu Alex Richter, aka the Kung Fu Genius, who shares with us some of his Bruce Lee collectibles and learn how Bruce Lee's inspiration, leading him to study Wing Chun Kung Fu, has changed his life forever.
So I had been doing WT, before I started teaching, I had been doing it for just shy of 5 years, but 3 of those years was 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. That was all I was doing. Wow. So I really trained intensively as an instructor.
So would you say all this came about because of Bruce Lee, following this path of Wing Chun and dedicating your life for 20 years and you kind of getting off your path of sales in BMW and just saying, I want to make this my life?
Yeah, if it were not for Bruce Lee, I would not have the career that I have right now. I would not be... It's funny, in the Lost interview, Bruce Lee says, he talks about how he had no idea when he began practicing that his martial art would lead to all of these things, right? Yeah. And for me, I have a similar path in that I had no idea when I first got into Bruce Lee that it would lead into all the other things. Like, because of my fascination with Bruce Lee, obviously I became fascinated in Bruce Lee, but also Wing Chun, but martial arts in general. My love for Hong Kong and Cantonese culture and the Cantonese language started because of him. Yeah. My wanting to know the history of Hong Kong and the other people who were around him at that time. Like, I'm outside of just Wing Chun, I'm like a huge Hong Kong history nerd, especially the history of Hong Kong in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I wouldn't have that fascination if it were not for him. I mean, if it were not for Bruce Lee, I cannot imagine what I would be doing. I'd be selling widgets and miserable.
Isn't it funny? There's so many people out there that went on so many paths that were directed by Bruce Lee and their introduction to Bruce Lee, and they just wanted to stay in some path that somehow was related to what he was doing. Whether it's working out and staying as fit as possible, or learning Wing Chun, or now doing JKD, or some people are drawn to him through collecting, right? Because they want to feel this connection between Bruce and them, and they do it through collecting and finding personal items on him. It's like everyone has their own path and how he touched them. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was just that special to so many people.
When I'm in Hong Kong, I had a very funny conversation with a Sifu 3-4 years ago. Yeah. And someone told him, like, Alex can speak a little bit of Cantonese, right? And he was a little skeptical. And so we went out to eat, and he goes, I heard you can say you can speak some Cantonese. Well, my Cantonese is very basic. And my Cantonese is very basic. But he was like, how did you start learning Cantonese? And I said, from Bruce Lee. I would watch the Chinese versions of his films and try to figure it out. And he's like, what was one of the first things you said? And I'm like, 中國人唔係病夫. And he was like, because that is the Chinese are not sick men.
Oh, that was a classic line.
He was like blown away that I said it, but also he thought it was so funny because I'm a white guy saying Chinese are not sick men, right? And he was like, that's really the first thing you do. I said, yes. And so that line always stuck out for me, right? Like in that line in Fist of Fury when he comes out and he's like, 話俾你知，中國人唔係病夫, right? And every time he says that, I get goosebumps.
Now you listen to me. I'll only say once. We are not sick men.
Goosebumps. Not only is it the first thing that I learned in Cantonese, but because that was such a powerful sentiment for the Chinese in the early 70s, right?
When he said that after he demolished the entire Japanese school, and then the music comes on, dun, 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 and he walks out of the school. That was powerful,
Absolutely. And I still, to this day, get goosebumps.
Same here. Wow, that's interesting. Wow, so you went from Wing Chun, then you opened up your own school, and then in your visits to Hong Kong, like, what were some of the things that tied to Bruce? Like, when you would go out there, did you visit any of the schools that he trained in at the time? Did you meet some of the Yip Man's students? Like, what was the connection there?
So the first few years when I was going to Hong Kong, I didn't do too much Bruce Lee stuff because I was going there for my own training. I was teaching in New York City, but I still had advanced program to learn. So when I would go to Hong Kong, I would go and take lessons and private lessons and things. So my first bunch of trips, I think I've been to Hong Kong 26, 27 times. Yeah. I always joke, I live in Queens. I've been to Hong Kong more times than I've been to Brooklyn. And and which is probably true. But those first batch of trips in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, I was more focused on my own Wing Chun training because I was still wanting to learn advanced programs.
So who would you go out and see out
So
there?
I would go and learn from my Sigong Leung Teng and from his association.
Nice.
And so, after 2009, I started to have a little bit more time in Hong Kong, and I'd been there so often that I was kind of familiar with it. So I would start to wander off and start to tick off some of those Bruce Lee bucket list things that I wanted to do. When you go on the Bruce Lee tour of Hong Kong, there's a lot of stuff that's there that's still the same, like when he grew up. Tak Sun, the primary school, the elementary school that he went to, is still there.
Wow.
And they have a little sign in front, like, oh, Bruce Lee went to the school. And it's right around the corner from the house that he grew up in on Nathan Road. But the house that he grew up in, Nathan Road, is not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's a mall, and it's been a mall since the 80s. So every time I go, like, oh, you see that mall over there? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, that Bruce, that used to be where he grew up, but it doesn't look like that anymore. And unfortunately, Hong Kong, they're not very sentimental with their old culture.
Yeah.
Like, Bruce's old 41 Cumberland home was torn down.
Right? I heard.
If they can't make money with it, they'll just tear it down. And they don't care how historic it is or whatever. They are very extreme.
Yeah, I would have loved to see it being converted into a museum and put some of his personal items in there. Now you're walking through his home. Make it a tourist site, right?
I spoke to some members of the Hong Kong government about that because they had talked about doing that for a long time. But apparently the Lee estate wanted Hong Kong to foot the whole bill for turning that thing into a museum, but then also give them all the money. So they were like, no, all right? And so that's why.
And now we have no more home that he...
now you have no more home. And so the home that he grew up in is a mall. His mansion in Kowloon Tong is now demolished. Who knows what they're going to put there. The only one home that's still around is the apartment that he lived in before he got the Kowloon Tong home.
Okay.
He was funny because he had made Big Boss. He had made Fists of Fury. But he was living in a tiny Hong Kong apartment at that time. That building is still there. You can still go there. Yeah. And I think even the same floor. So I'm sure someone is actually living in there right now. But it would be a very small Hong Kong style apartment.
Yeah.
But then you go like, all right, let's go on the Bruce Lee tour. The Golden Harvest office where he signed his first 2-picture deal with Raymond Chow. It was over there. Yeah, it's a mall now. The home that he grew up in, it's a mall now. He had this Golden Harvest Studios. It's not there anymore. So a lot of like the real stuff isn't there anymore. The
unfortunate.
Chingsan Monastery, the finger pointing away to the moon scene, that's still there. You can go.
Yeah, I heard you can see that. So that's great.
And a lot of the exteriors that they shot for Enter the Dragon, you can still see, like Han's Palace, which is with the exterior. That's actually not where it was, but that building is still there. It's on the way to the peak. You can see it. And so there are a lot of places like that. But it's getting harder and harder these days to find that stuff.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Wow. So then when you went there, did you also study in certain Wing Chun schools over there, or?
So I left I left the Leung Teng organization in 2011 and became independent. So really up until that time, I trained just with the Leung Teng school.
Yep.
After that time, I trained with some of my other Kung Fu uncles. I'm very close to Sifu Chi Man. Sifu Chi Man right now is the eldest living senior student of Yip Man alive today in Hong Kong. And he's so old school. He's Bruce Lee Si-Heng. He's Bruce Lee Senior. And so he started learning Wing Chun because he was doing Choi Lei Fut, and he heard about Wing Chun, and his good friend William Cheung at the time was doing Wing Chun, and they had like a little friendly challenge match, and William Cheung beat up Chan Chi Man and then introduced him to Yip Man, and that's how he started learning Wing Chun. And then shortly after that, Bruce came to the Wing Chun school, but he actually started Wing Chun before Bruce. He's still around in Hong Kong. He speaks English. He's in his 80s. He's totally clear. He has all these really great old stories. And
you have his signature somewhere, right? Do you have?
No, but I mean, I have videos of me with Chan Chi Man and stuff. And so I go to him, and then so every time I go to Hong Kong, I'll go to his home, and for hours we'll talk about Wing Chun. He'll tell me about how Sifu Yip Man taught him and how he taught the different students, and actually what it was like being in the class. So I got a lot of this firsthand, this is kind of how he taught you in the first few months, and then he'd have you do this, and then he'd have you do that.
Because, now, was he there when Bruce was there or no?
So he was there. He started before.
Oh, before Bruce. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
That's why he's his Si-Heng, right?
Oh, wow.
And Bruce came a little bit later. And but Bruce was mostly tutored by his Sihing Wong Sun Leung.
Yeah.
Whereas Sifu Chen Chi Man actually learned privately from
I got you.
at that time. But he did say that they actually did meet at Wong Sun Leung's either his home or Wong Sun Leung's school, and he did do Chisao with Bruce at that time.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, but that's when Bruce was starting, and I'm like, oh, what was it like? And he was like, he was just kind of a beginner at that time.
Yeah.
It was nothing special. He said the interesting thing about Bruce was that for them is that they all knew him because he was a movie star. He was a child star.
Yeah.
So people forget about that but he was actually kind of a big child star in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And
he made what, 20 films?
Something like that. And as Bruce became a teenager, he had more and more prominent roles.
Right.
So people knew who he was from the films. And Chan Sifu told me that he was walking down the street one day with Bruce in the area of where they were learning, and Bruce was very famous at that time because of the films.
Yeah.
And Bruce had just started learning Wing Chun, and he was very fanatical about it. And he says while they're walking down the street, Bruce is practicing the Sifu Lim Tao movements in the air, and then. Like, people are already staring at you. Don't draw more attention to yourself,
said
right?
He practiced all the time. Every minute he can get, he was practicing, right?
Yeah.
They used to call him never sit still, right? Because he just couldn't stop.
Absolutely. So he told me that story. I thought it was really interesting. But Sifu Chan told me a story about Bruce Lee, and I think I told it to you briefly.
Yeah, why don't you mention that again?
It's one of my favorite Bruce Lee stories because you hear Bruce Lee stories, and a lot of times they're a little vague, but you don't always really get the human side of it. And so Sifu Chen used to work for the YMCA in Hong Kong, the YMCA headquarters, which seems kind of weird, but the YMCA in Hong Kong was a really big deal.
Yeah.
It was not just like a YMCA here, it was like a social club. It was like a major thing. And Sifu Chen worked there at the headquarters, which was next to the Peninsula Hotel, which is one of the most famous hotels in Hong Kong.
Those are great.
And Bruce used to frequent the Peninsula Hotel. And right next to it was this YMCA. Sifu Chan worked in the YMCA. He worked, I think, in the gift shop or in the store or cafeteria or something like that. And this was in 1972. And of course, Sifu Chan had not seen Bruce since the late 50s when they were learning Wing Chun. And then Bruce goes to the States and he doesn't see him for all these years. And Sifu Chan is working in this YMCA and Bruce Lee walks by. And this is, of course, Bruce Lee before Way the Dragon. So he's already a big star in Hong Kong.
Yeah, absolutely. He already made Chinese Connection, Fist of Fury.
And Bruce and Chan Sifu, they kind of lock eyes, and then Bruce recognizes him and starts talking to him. Now, the reason why Bruce was at the YMCA is because he was visiting his older brother Robert, who practiced fencing. And he practiced fencing at that YMCA. Wow. There was like a court in there where he was doing fencing. Bruce went there to see his brother, or maybe train with his brother, or watch his brother.
Or learn the fencing footwork.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? And so, he might have been on his way out or something. And then so he sees, Chan Sifu and like, hey, and so they start talking. And Chen Chi Man, he's told me this story many, many times. And he says, they were talking and, reminiscing on the old times and all these kind of things. And, how's this person, that, blah, 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 blah. And he said an hour went by. And they're just chatting
away.
And Chen Chi Man realizes, Bruce is a big movie star at this point. Probably does not have a lot of time. But they've been chatting for like an hour. So he says to Bruce, he says, hey, do you have somewhere to go? I don't want to keep you, assuming it's somebody busy. And then Bruce told him, he says, well, I'm making a new movie now with the American karate champion. Talk about Chuck Norris. And we're choreographing our final fight in that movie, and he's in the Peninsula Hotel right now waiting for me so we can choreograph it. And he goes, oh, you mean he's waiting for you right now? Yeah, he's waiting. Well, shouldn't you go see him now? And Bruce says, it's okay. He can wait.
Chuck can wait.
Yeah, and I thought that was kind of funny because here's Bruce Lee. When later, of course, that he basically dies the next year, you're really looking at him right at this moment at his peak in his own lifetime.
Yeah.
And he sees someone from his childhood, from that Wing Chun time, and in that moment, it doesn't matter that he's working on choreography. It doesn't matter that Chuck Norris is waiting in the Peninsula Hotel for him. this was the most important thing for Bruce in that moment, was for him to kind of reminisce with someone that he had trained with. And I thought, like, you know, because a lot of people say about how Bruce was very short-tempered and stuff like that during that time period, but he was short-tempered towards producers and directors and things like that. He certainly was not that way with the people he cared about. Yeah. And I think that story really kind of humanizes him in a way that you very rarely hear from that specific time period in his life.
Well, that's a funny story. Yeah, especially with Chuck. He can wait.
He can wait.
That's so funny.
That guy, whatever, right?
Hilarious.
Yeah.
So, wow, so you have an interesting background, man.
I consider myself a bit like the Forrest Gump of Wing Chun. And anytime something crazy happened or whatever, I happened to be in the room when it happened. Or I was in the background when something crazy was going on. And that's always been my luck. To have had some great conversations with some important people.
Yeah. Well, not to switch gears, but I know when I knew I was going to interview you, I asked you if you had any collectibles that you wanted to share with the group, because, you know, on this channel, I not only talk Bruce Lee and JKD, but I also, you know, share different collectibles from around the world with different collectors. And you said you had a couple of collectibles that you wanted to bring by.
But when I come to your place and I say I have a couple collectibles, that's like when I meet someone and someone says, "Oh, you teach martial arts?" Yeah, I did karate as a kid once, right? So, you know, there are levels to this, okay? And I have like a few things.
Hey, man, they're all related to Bruce, though. So let's pull out a few. And tell me how you picked them up and where you got them from.
Okay, so the first one, let me show this one here. This came out a few years ago. This isn't like super rare by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a picture book that was made by Guai Long. Guai Long, that's his Chinese name. Yep. He doesn't have an English name, otherwise I would call him Charlie Ang or whatever his name is, right? But that's his Chinese name. And he basically got, from what I understood, the rights to publish a lot of the Golden Harvest photos, like from the sets and so on. And so he published it in this picture book, and the photos are super high quality.
I know, you showed me them. They're incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and like it comes in this heavy case.
It's like that's the thickest book I've ever seen. I can't believe how heavy that is.
Absolutely.
I heard to get this from Hong Kong, the shipping is like almost $100 just to get it shipped to you.
Yeah, I remember, you know, when this came out, a lot of it was funny, I was there with my students, and I was like, "Hey, do you guys want to get this rare book?" And all of my students were like, "Yes, of course." But we didn't get it from the bookstore. We actually went to Guai Long's office.
Right.
And like it was like a little office in Hong Kong, and he pulled in. He's got all these stacked up there, and he signed it for us.
Wow, look at that!
And so I got a copy of it, and all my students who came, they also got one too. And I felt bad because some of my friends, like Hector, he wanted a copy. He's like, "Hey, can you get it for me? This book weighs a ton."
Did you get it for Hector?
I couldn't, because I was already.
Somehow he has it. I seen it in his place.
I think he had originally he ordered it eventually, because the problem was I bring back so much stuff from Hong Kong.
Oh yeah,
you get charged when your baggage weighs too much.
Oh, I know.
So I was like, I don't have any space.
Just open it up. I just want to see if we can see, and we'll take some pictures of it. Just let's see some of the qualities of these pictures in here.
Yeah.
Wow.
These are all from the.
Hold that up just a minute.
Yeah, well, here. So we have these here. Let's see.
Wow.
So a lot of the press photos, and also a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and also from the actual shooting. Yeah, these are amazing. So these photos, you know, where he's in the suit, he does the jump kicks. These are shot in Tsim Sha Tsui and at Harbor City.
In Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, yeah. This is a car park, and here's a hotel. It's now a mall in front of it, but and if you go to this same spot in Hong Kong, this hotel is still there.
Wow.
This car park is still there, but behind it, there nothing but buildings. Everything's been built up.
Really?
But when I take my students to Hong Kong, I bring them here, and we take photos of them in the same spots.
I was going to say, but did you put the same suit on?
No, hey, I would love to get that suit. I would sport. Look at how cool he was. Look how cool he was.
So cool.
Yeah. These photos here. That was a great photo shoot. There's in front of the SL, right?
Wow.
Yeah, these are
so
amazing.
This is a complete picture book, right?
Complete picture book. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, Chinese
and it's all the Golden Harvest era stuff. I don't remember if there's Enter the Dragon stuff in here. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It would be like the 4 Golden Harvest films.
Wow, look at that, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go through this book for an hour. That is incredible. This is
really
like,
amazing.
That is quality. I don't even have this in my collection. As many things as I have here, I never had a chance to pick that book up.
I will have to talk to Mr. next time I'm in Hong Kong and pick you up one.
You got a deal. Wow, that's amazing. And you said this came with a 2-part series. So what's the second one?
It came in 2 parts, and so it comes with a smaller paperback version here. And this book tells a little bit about like his history and his story, and it's got early photos, so it's not just the movie stuff, but it also has collectibles and things like that, like the tickets from the different movies, like and photos of the lobby cards,
the lobby cards
from Enter the Dragon with the old Concorde logo on there and everything.
Oh, that's great. And this is in Chinese and English, or is it all Chinese?
This one is only in Chinese.
All in Chinese.
Yeah. But as I like to say, the pictures are in English.
Exactly. Wow, that is incredible. So this is more like a collector's book, because you see a lot of the personal items of Bruce and also some of the rare collectibles of the Hong Kong days.
Absolutely.
Wow, look at that. That's great. So this came in a 2-part series.
2-part series,
Neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one even comes with a set of postcards.
Look at that, a little postcard
which
set
is in there. I haven't opened it, but when I got the book, Guai Long gave me a set of the postcards in addition to the one that comes here. So I actually have these postcards at home. I should have brought them.
Are those of Bruce in there, the postcards, or are they just postcards of different movies?
No. They are postcards of Bruce.
Oh.
And they're mostly, as I recall, photos from his original early films as a child. They're like snapshots from their as postcards.
Nice.
Amazing.
That's a great collectible, man.
Amazing, yeah.
So what else do you have in your bag of tricks there?
Well, so this one is particularly, I suppose now, sentimental because James DeMille recently passed away just 2 weeks ago.
May he rest in peace, I know.
And James DeMille was one of the original core of Seattle students, and then later developed his own Wing Chun Do system based on the things he had learned from Bruce Lee. And like I mentioned earlier, was also the guy who taught my teacher, who eventually first taught me and introduced me into Wing Chun. So I have a story for this. I told it once on the podcast. So James DeMille published a bunch of books, and they all have like a proper cover, but apparently a few of them he self-published. And so we were talking about this before, and this is his Tao of Wing Chun Do Chi Sao Volume 2. And I got this at his school. Because
where was that at?
His school at that time was in North Seattle.
Okay, Seattle.
And the reason I was there was because I was invited to go to a sport jiu-jitsu tournament that he was hosting. It was the first one he did. Now this was in the 90s, late 90s, so it was in the kind of early days of UFC and things like that. So a lot of the martial art guys were starting to talk about grappling and things. So I was still doing the non-classical Wing Chun at the time. I had not yet started WT. But my Sifu Johan at the time, also taught us some grappling, some wrestling, things like that. And one week he said, hey, Sifu James DeMille is going to have a sport jiu-jitsu tournament at his school next week. You want to fight in it? And I was like, sure, why not? Teenager, right? So stupid, right? And at that time, my grappling repertoire was like I could do 1 or 2 escapes, and I think I knew one arm bar,
right?
And that was
exactly.
it. All right, and the rest was like Wing Chun, right?
Say you knew an arm bar.
Yeah, but when you're a teenager, you're usually high on confidence, low on brains. Okay,
that's fun.
So, and also there was only 1 week to prepare for it, right? And I was like, sure, because 1, I would finally have the chance to meet Sifu James DeMille, and 2, I would have a chance to test myself in grappling a little bit. Now, it wasn't like MMA; it was basically kind of like kickboxing, but they allowed grappling. But when you went to the ground, I think they allowed us 30 seconds on the ground, and then they stood us back up.
Oh, okay.
But so you could win by points, and I think you could knock the guy down or out, and you could also win by submission. Okay. And you had to wear the gi jacket, which I wasn't used to, right? But I was like, whatever.
Early days of MMA, man.
Early days. And then so we went there, and I was like in James DeMille's school, and there weren't enough people in that first tournament to justify all the weight classes. So I ended up having to fight someone who was heavier than me, and he was a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, in like traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, and I go, oh crap. My first fight is against a guy who's bigger than me.
And he knows jiu-jitsu.
And he's like a brown belt, right? And okay, whatever. So I had my first fight. James DeMille is watching. My Sifu is watching. So it's like, I'm not only fighting in front of my Sifu, I'm also fighting in front of one of Bruce Lee's students. Right?
First generation students, yes.
And I beat the jiu-jitsu guy.
Nice.
And so for me, even to this day, it was probably one of the best days of my martial arts career. And so I beat him. I basically was able to keep him from grabbing me using my Wing Chun strikes. He did grab me once, take me to the ground, but the moment he took me down, I was able to reverse him, and I got points. I remember hearing the crowd, like, because I was so much smaller than the guy, and I reversed him, and they were like clapping, and I was like, well, I reversed the jiu-jitsu guy, and then I was able to keep him off of me. I won that fight. My second fight that night was against one of James DeMile's students.
No.
But I was so exhausted from the first fight because I didn't have any time to really prepare.
Yeah.
I was so exhausted. James DeMile's student basically ran right through me, put me on the ground, and choked me out right away. But I didn't care. Because I beat the jiu-jitsu guy. Like, I had no problem losing to another Wing Chun guy who used some jiu-jitsu on me, as long as I didn't lose to the jiu-jitsu guy. Right? And so after my fight, so I ended up getting, I think, third place because, like, the other guy, then the guy who beat me, then he got the second place in the final or whatever. So I got third place, having only done 2 fights, and I was like, okay, whatever. And James DeMile gave me my medal, and after that, he sat down and talked to me because I had, in my fight, used Wing Chun to keep the jiu-jitsu guy off of me. Whereas even some of the other guys, they were using just some, like, kickboxing and stuff like that. So
you actually tried to apply the Wing Chun.
Yeah, so I was using... I weren't allowed to hit to the face, so I was just chain punching him in the chest and using straight kicks to keep him off me. And then so I sat and talked to James DeMile for 30 minutes.
Wow.
And he sat there.
What an opportunity that was.
It was amazing. It was like, first of all, I won this fight, won this test that I had, right? And I'm sitting there talking to him. He told me about what it was like training with Bruce Lee. And he talked about, I remember he was talking about Bruce Lee had a toolkit of a certain number of Wing Chun techniques that were always his go-to. And it didn't matter what he was doing or what he was experimenting with. When stuff got serious, he had these like things.
Those were
punches
in his
and packs out and these things like that, right? And just listening to him tell me those things was amazing. And then while I was at his school, I purchased his Chisao book, and he signed it.
Oh, neat.
And so, now that he just passed a couple of weeks ago, it's actually bittersweet, but it says, "To Alex, you did great. You will make a great champion.
Look at that,
Your
man.
friend Jim DeMille."
Congrats.
Right?
Yeah, we'll take a picture of that.
And
that.
especially given the context of, that whole "you did great," and like, what more could like a teenager want than to beat someone using Wing Chun, beat someone of another style in front of one of Bruce Lee's students,
and get the acknowledgement from James DeMille, right?
So that
amazing. Wow.
So that makes this one of my prized collections.
I can understand why, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else do I have here? Well, this is I guess you could say this is directly related to Bruce. This was one of Bruce Lee's.
Stay tuned for part 3 as Sifu Alex Richter, aka the Kung Fu Genius, continues to share his Bruce Lee collectibles, stories on Bruce Lee, and how his passion to study Wing Chun Kung Fu has changed his life forever.